Well, welcome back to TechNest, everybody. This week we have Hope Kahan with us. And Hope is the founder and owner of Trinity Park Talent. She launched the firm in 2019 to help organizations that prioritize being a good place to work and attract and identify top talent. And she's going to be here with us today talking about hiring for peak performance. So, Hope, I'm going to turn it over to you, but welcome.
Thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to be with Tech Fort Worth. I love what you guys are doing, and I love talking about hiring. So this is my favorite topic, and I can't wait to present on it. Today, we're talking about hiring for peak performance. And when Devin asked me what we should title the workshop, I chose peak performance because it is an area that is a passion of mine to study. And I thought I'd share one resource with you that is a book that was really inspiring for me called Peak. And it's all about the subject of deliberate practice, where you iterate and continuously improve and do deep study to get better and better and better at what you do. I'm trying to apply this methodology to the hiring process, but wherever you're applying it inside your company, this book may offer you some inspiration. And part of the reason I wanted to start with this concept is because the type of hiring that I do is high stakes hiring for positions that you really want to get right. It's an investment of your time, and you don't want to do it very quickly. You want to make sure that you're very thorough. You want the best possible outcome because you know that every person you hire contributes to the success of your business, and you really want to invest in that process. Speaking of investing in the process, hiring as an investment. I spent close to 7 years working for an investment firm before I started this business. And, anytime we made an investment, we ran a due diligence process on that investment. And if you think of people as one of your most important assets, of course, you would want to run a very thorough evaluation. You can never get to 100% guarantee that somebody is going to work out for the long run. There are so many factors, and human beings are complicated creatures. But if you run a very thorough process, you can optimize for your high probability of success, and you can minimize your chances of risk. Now, with rolling the dice, you can have big wins, but you can also have big losses. And the type of hiring that I'm doing is hopefully producing consistent, replicable, great outcomes. So hiring for peak performance requires a structured process. This is definitely not something where you just want to wing it. You don't want to be making decisions based on gut instinct, and you don't want to be scrambling to figure out what to do with a candidate when you do find somebody that you like. Because great candidates are often lost in the process when it's chaotic, or they get another offer before they get to the finish line, or they may see that you don't really have a plan for how you're going about this, and they may start wondering what it's like to be inside your environment. If you have an organized, structured process, then you can create a great candidate experience that entices them to want to work for you. And peak performers want to compete. They want to engage in a process, and it's a two-way interview. They're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them, and you want to give them a chance to get a look behind the curtain. And so they want a more involved process. I've had a number of candidates tell me that they really appreciate a thorough process because it builds their confidence, both in the way the organization runs their business, but also because they got to know the team and the company and its challenges, and they became more excited about the opportunity as they moved through the interview stages. Here are a few other reasons why it's really important to have a structured interview process. When you look back at what's been going on in the world in the past year, starting out last year, unemployment was so incredibly low. And now we have so many people who are on the market for a new job for reasons that are no fault of their own because of the pandemic. And that means if you're posting your jobs publicly, you may be getting a larger candidate pool, applicant pool than before, and you're going to see a broader range of backgrounds in that applicant pool. And it's both important to be compassionate to people who are applying for jobs during these times, but it's also really important to have a structured process to help find that needle in the haystack when the haystack is larger and you're looking for the person who's going to be the best match for your opportunity. The remote work environment has also created new opportunities and new challenges. So a lot of employers are running their interview process completely remotely, and they're not meeting with their candidates in person before they offer the job. And I have found that this is actually prompting employers to do things the right way that will benefit their organization for the long run, even when they can meet in person. Because they're trying to make this work over Zoom or over phone calls, they're having to be more thoughtful about what stages a candidate moves through and how to validate they're a good fit for the job. And so they're putting these processes into place that ultimately, even when they can meet with people in person, are going to benefit the overall outcome. Diversity inclusion should be top of mind for absolutely everyone. Diversity and inclusion ties to peak performance. And also, a structured interview process is designed to make sure you're screening candidates for job-related traits and you're giving all candidates an equitable opportunity to be considered for the role. I'm going to make a couple of different analogies using the fishing in the pond analogy. I'm going to go two totally different directions with this, and forgive me if the first one is kind of corny, but imagine that you're going fishing and you're looking for that fish that is going to make an absolutely delicious dinner. And you have in your mind that you want the perfect striped bass, and only a striped bass will do. You want it to be at least 12 pounds. You want it to look a certain way, and you want it to have a certain level of plumpness and size, and everything has to be absolutely perfect about it. Well, there may be a lot of other fish in this pond, but if you have your sights set on that perfect bass, good luck finding it. It's going to be very, very challenging, and it may be very elusive. But if you start thinking about the fact that whenever you do catch a fish, there are all these different ways to prepare it. You can fry it, you can smoke it, you can season it, you can bake it. There are all these different ways to have a great outcome with whichever fish you catch. Then suddenly there are a lot more great fish in that pond that could be very successful on your dinner plate. So the analogy I'm making is, if you commit to the success of whoever you hire by investing in onboarding, by investing in development, by giving feedback, by committing to setting up your new hire for success, then a lot more people are suddenly eligible to be a great match for your company. And you can focus more on their capabilities and aptitude and less on a certain exact pedigree, resume, very specific type of experience, because the resume may not necessarily even be indicative of their aptitude inside your organization. So committing to success increases the pool of great candidates available to you. Now, I'm going to go a totally different way with this, and thinking about hiring for peak performance and attracting diversity into your candidate pool. If you're fishing in the same pond and there is a homogeneous group of candidates in that pond where all these other businesses are fishing, then you've got a ton of competition in that pond. But if you fish in other ponds that aren't being fished in nearly as much, if you start looking for underrepresented groups of people, or you start going off the beaten path, maybe your company always focuses on the top 10 business schools, but you could focus on other schools that produce phenomenal candidates. Suddenly your competition for top talent is much lower. And I assure you, there are phenomenal candidates in all of these other ponds. So why not go where there's less competition? Something else I want to talk about when you're thinking about hiring for peak performance is switching the dynamic of the interview from a game show format to an authentic dialogue. I don't even know how we got to this place where interviews are games, where they're one way pop questions, see what somebody does under pressure. How are they going to answer this question? It has to be exactly right. And the candidate feels like they're under a microscope and they're scared to say the wrong thing. You create this completely unnatural experience in that circumstance, which in no way shows you how this person could actually perform inside your environment. So I'm a huge fan of breaking the ice, putting the candidate at ease, telling them how the process is going to go, encouraging them to be open and tell stories and speak more naturally and put them at ease so that you can get to know who they really are and not just how they interview. Candidates will also really appreciate this because they feel it's a more respectful way to be engaged with. And again, remember, great talent is interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. So I've mentioned the term structured interviews a couple of times, and it's a really important term to know. Here's an excerpt from a guide on interviewing that was put out by SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Managers. This is one of the best authorities on all matters related to human resources. They crank out a ton of rich content that is current, that is based in research. You can get free resources on their website, or for a small membership fee, you can get access to tons more resources. So they are one of my favorite resources for current trends. And this guide on interviewing talks about the goal of structured interviews. The main purpose of structured interviewing is to objectively compare candidates for positions by asking a specific set of job relevant questions. What structured interviewing is doing is it is reducing the possibility of discretionary questions that may be, unfortunately, inadvertently based in unconscious bias. When people start making decisions or asking questions based on gut feel or what feels good, or you start talking about, things you have in common on a personal level that don't relate to the job, then you're going down that path of making a bad hiring decision, because these things don't actually correlate to performance. And when you can objectively compare candidates by moving them through the same interview stages and asking similar questions, you can do an apples to apples comparison for fit of the job. And that creates an overall more equitable process. Here is a sample of interview stages. This is actually the format we used for Sarah, a former Tech Fort Worth client, where we mapped out several stages. And this interview process was done 100% remotely, but it can be adapted to meeting in person also. Typically, when I work with a client, I do the phone screen first, and then I collect a short video and a short writing sample that I turn over to my client. And then they step in at stage 3, and the hiring manager will do their interview. And then usually, if you want to know more information, depending on the seniority of the position, we'll ask for some type of work sample or maybe even an online assessment to help determine fit for the role. And there should also be team interviews. And then, of course, reference calls before you wrap things up. In that very first phone screen, I do these typically in about 45 minutes of time. And I am trying to get a high level overview of fit for the company and understand why they're interested in the job. And so I'm listening for things like, did they do their homework about the company? Have they worked in a startup before, if this is a startup company? I'm looking for fit in terms of the size of the company, the stage of growth, the environment, the amount of resources they'll have. So for example, if I'm working with a client who is a startup company, we probably don't want to hire somebody who's coming straight out of a really large organization and has never worked in a small organization before, because they may not have the skill set that transfers well to working amidst ambiguity and having to build systems and processes from scratch. Or at least you want to screen for that and test and see if they have that capability. Maybe don't write them off too quickly, but dig in to figure out if they have that. So in that phone screen, I'm just looking for kind of high level fit. Should they move forward? What is the context of their search? Did they do their homework on the company? And are they enthusiastic and they want to move forward? I also do a compensation check in that very first phone call, which I think is really important. Candidates, of course, want to know at least ballpark to decide if it's going to be a good use of their time, especially before you ask them to put in a substantial investment of their own time moving forward through the interview stages. So I like to at least give them a range on the base salary, even if I can't fully play out bonus or equity or development track for the role. The base salary is a good starting point to see if you're within range. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the interview questions that you can ask at different stages. So you may have heard of behavioral questions. Surely at some point you've been asked, tell me about a time when type questions. And behavioral questions are really, really great for understanding how a candidate behaved in the past in a real circumstance, because theoretically, how they behaved in the past will be predictive of how they will behave in the future in your environment. And again, the key to successful interviewing, especially when you're asking structured interview questions of the behavioral format, is creating that authentic dialogue. The mistake I see made with these is that they are asked very quickly and too many questions are asked and they just skim the surface. So let me tell you why we're looking at a slide that has an iceberg on it. The way I was trained to deliver behavioral questions, and I did my training with a consultancy out of Chicago called AUM Partners. Fran Skinner wrote a book on high performing investment teams. She also writes for Barron's. And she trained me on how to conduct behavioral questions. And so you've got this tee-up question. That's the tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you didn't agree with your boss. Tell me about a time when you overcame a challenge. That's the tip of the iceberg. But the real information comes out when you drill down below the surface. So a really good, juicy behavioral question that's going to give you helpful data, you're probably going to spend about 15 minutes unpacking the answer to just this one question. So if you think back to the stages of the interview I was telling you about, I don't do these in the first call. Again, first call, I'm just figuring out, should they move forward? Contextually, does this look like it might be a good match? But these behavioral questions are good for farther along in the process when the hiring manager is meeting with a candidate or when they progress to team member interviews. And you want to really understand how someone handles themselves on the job. And so when I talk about the drill down questions, so say you might start with, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your boss. You might drill down to, okay, what was the context? Who was involved? When was it? Where was it? What was going on? Well, what were the possible outcomes? How did you handle it? Who did you go to seek advice? What did other people around you think was the right thing to do? All of these different types of questions start to show you how somebody thinks, how they use judgment, how they interact with their team. You'll also see opportunities to identify if someone has what I consider an immediate deal breaker is the victim mindset. There's a great book called The Empowerment Dynamic. I think it's called TED, The Empowerment Dynamic, that is about the healthy way of being in different circumstances and the negative way of being in different circumstances. And they talk about the victim versus creator mindset. A victim is someone who bad things happen to them. The creator is someone who makes the best out of different situations. And by all means, bad things do happen to good people. And sometimes there's a difficult story that someone needs to share with you. What you care about most is how they relate to it, what they learned from it, how they interacted with others. So you can get a lot from one behavioral question that you dig into really deeply. I'm going to come back to touching on diversity matters. And I want to give you a little bit more information on why it matters. This is just one small nugget that I pulled from a McKinsey and Company report, but there is tons of research available now. A quick Google search can produce current information from major consultancies and human resources associations on the performance metrics that correlate to gender, ethnic, and racial diversity. And so this one stat shows that for ethnic and cultural diversity, top quartile companies were 33% more likely to outperform on profitability. So when you think about diversity, you've got three different things that I'm going to highlight for you. And the first one is social justice, being equitable in providing opportunity to underrepresented groups. But not every business is making this personal connection or understanding how or why it applies to them. So I also like to underscore that this is not just for social justice, for the right thing to do. This is also directly correlating to financial performance. And this is also becoming absolutely essential to attracting and retaining talent, because the millennial generation is the largest generation coming into the workforce. On the upper end of their age range, they're now around 40 or early 40s at this point. And so the millennial generation highly prioritizes diversity and inclusion. And I can give you some anecdotal experience from my past year hiring across different industries, different level positions at the mid to senior level. I'm now seeing this show up on applications for jobs. I like to ask questions like, what interests you about the job and what do you most want to know about this company? And the way people respond to those questions tell me who is doing their homework, who is really enthusiastic. The high achievers set themselves apart by how they approach an opportunity to answer questions like that. And one of the things I'm seeing more and more is, what interests you about the company? People are saying things like, I saw on your job description that you included your core values. I saw that diversity is important to you. I'd like to know more about your initiatives about this. And then when I ask people what they want to know about a company, more and more I'm seeing candidates in the application say they'd like to know what the company is doing to nurture and support a healthy culture. And they're specifically calling out diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, wanting to know what companies are doing. So you might think about what is on your careers page, what is on your job post. How do you put this at the forefront to show people it's a priority to you, because the questions are being asked. And if you're not addressing it, you're going to find that you're losing access to great talent, and you're going to be viewed as very antiquated in your process. One of the most important things that I think ties to peak performance and also running an inclusive process is getting your team clear on what you mean by culture fit, what it is not and what it is, because this is a loaded term. And if people are assuming that culture fit is just someone you want to go and have beers with, you are definitely making decisions along the lines of rolling the dice. And so I have literally seen on a template that someone was using to interview candidates, do they pass the beer test or not? And that's going to get you in trouble. You don't want to be making a decision based on that. Now, enjoying spending time with somebody and enjoying going to happy hour with them is not mutually exclusive of who is the best fit for the job. It's not one or the other, but it's not the right basis for making a decision. You want to make sure that you're making your decision on who to hire based on data that correlates to what is needed to be successful in the job. So here's how I define culture fit: aligned with your organization's core values. If your organization has defined their core values, now you have a bar that should be something that is universally inclusive, that folks can relate to and demonstrate during the interview process. And I'd like to challenge you to even think about changing the language from culture fit to culture add. think about candidates who don't just fit in where you are, but who are actually going to elevate your organization's culture because they bring traits that are going to inspire other people, and they bring something different, a different outlook, a different way of being that could become hugely additive to lifting your culture up. I like to think about how a culture evolves over time, and it can happen by default or it can happen with intent. And cultures naturally evolve based on the people who come and go from an organization and the values that they uphold and the way they live into them. And so bringing people into your organization who are going to bring different positive traits will only enrich the culture and create a ripple effect that will benefit folks across the organization. I'm going to give you a couple of tips on where to slow down, where to stop altogether, and how to know when it feels right when you're interviewing. If you know, once you have defined your structured interview process, what the stages are that a candidate's going to move through, what the interview questions are that you're going to ask, don't skip steps. You might be really tempted when you meet someone who you click with, they're phenomenal. Maybe they were recommended to you by somebody you know, and you say, you know what, this just feels good. I don't have time to go through the whole process. Let's just do it. I'm going to be the person who says, don't skip steps, see it through. Make sure that you have a strong pool of candidates so you can do a healthy compare and contrast. Make sure that even if this person is amazing and your company is amazing, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a great long-term match. Because like I was saying earlier, if they come from a big company and you're a small startup company, they may still struggle in your environment. And so you want to see that whole process through from beginning to end to make sure everyone feels really good about it. If you're feeling rushed, you feel like you're under pressure, you're feeling nervous because you have to make a decision quickly, that is a huge indicator that you should slow down and be very methodical about how you're assessing the information you have. Again, you may not get to 100% certainty on a candidate. It's really impossible to do that. But if you have open loops that need to be tied up, go back and address them with the candidate. Figure out how you can get more information to build your confidence. So if you make a deliberate trade-off, you know it's a calculated risk and it's a low risk probability of failure, and the upside significantly outweighs the possible downside. If you're getting mixed signals from a candidate, they're either hot and cold, or they're really responsive and they're interviewing well, but then suddenly they're not responsive, or a story they're telling you doesn't quite add up, that's a good time to slow down and dig in. Make sure you get to the bottom of it, so that you're not leaving all of these question marks up in the air about what the mixed signals really mean. Here's when I say you should absolutely stop. If a candidate is coming across as very inauthentic, meaning they are interviewing really well, but too well. Their responses are canned, they're overly prepped, they're kind of salesy, you're having a really hard time breaking the ice, that is a red flag, especially if you're doing your part to create that authentic dialogue. You want to see that they meet you there in the middle and show you who they really are so that you can figure out what it's like to really work together. The victim mindset, I already touched on that one. That to me is a stop, do not continue, immediate pull the cord when you see strong indications of the victim mindset. You want someone who learns from their experiences, who grows, who builds up their own strength based on the challenges they've faced in the past, not someone who's beat down, who's always pointing a finger at others when things go wrong. And unresolved concerns. If you can't get to a point of comfort with concerns you have that are really bothering you, I'm afraid I know from experience, they probably will come back to haunt you after you hire this person. So resolve the concerns during the interview process. And if you can't, you should probably stop and move on to another candidate. Here's when you should move forward. When you have tested for values alignment through structured, intentional interview questions, these behavioral questions are a great way to find out how someone handles themselves in different situations. And you can listen for alignment with all of your organization's core values. And so if you see the values alignment and then you conduct the reference checks and they're glowing, that is a huge indication. And let me differentiate. A mediocre reference is as good as a bad reference. A moderate reference is almost a bad reference. A glowing reference is what you want. You want the references to say, I can't imagine not working with this person. I would love to work with them again. I'm going to miss them. They're amazing. Anyone would be lucky to have them. And then most importantly, across all of your interactions with a candidate, you want to make sure that you're using data to validate your decisions, that the data correlates with what the job requires, that you have been intentional in your process, and that you have information way beyond gut instinct backing up how you know someone is going to be a fit in your organization. And by the way, it should feel good too. But the feel good factor is an added bonus. It's not the basis of your decision making, but when you have values alignment, you have glowing references, and you have data from a structured interview process that backs up someone as a good fit for the role, it feels really good and you get really excited about that hire. I did want to share a book that is an all-time favorite, tried and true over several years since I first read it. This book, Who, was put out by the consultancy GH Smart. They have lots of information on sourcing strategies. I didn't really go into sourcing today. When I work with a client, I advise them on a custom sourcing strategy based on the industry, the level of the position, how common the title is, what market they're in. For some positions, you can post the job and get a great pool of candidates from one job post on LinkedIn. But I'm also a huge fan of tapping your network effectively and getting referrals. I'm also a huge fan of exploring different job boards other than the traditional ones that you might think of. But Who, the book, goes into a variety of different sourcing strategies that is hugely helpful to think about being creative. And then also they go through a lot of interview techniques, and they break down some different types of questions you can ask to screen for different traits. Great resource, definitely a keeper that I have referred to many, many times. And that brings us to the Q&A portion of this program. So I will invite Devin back in to help facilitate Q&A.
Hello, everybody. Hope, thank you so much. A little round of applause for y'all. I know I still have you on mute. I'm going to give you guys back the ability to unmute yourselves. You should be good with that now. And then yes, you should be able to share video as well. So feel free to put your own questions in the chat and I will read them out. We have, about 15 minutes. So I know I have a couple questions for Hope. The first one is, I know you touched on it a bit, but I'd like to go a little bit deeper into, the topic of diversity. Can you give any more examples of how you get more diversity into your candidate pool?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's a question that a lot of people are asking. And there's the best of intentions, but a lot of folks are saying, like we just don't know what else to do, and we don't have time to dig into this. Can you point us in the right direction? And one, I'll challenge that notion, and I'll say it doesn't take as much time as you think. Few Google searches, and you can come up with some great ideas on job boards. But I'm going to share some things that I've seen some of my clients doing, and a couple of things that I've tried to help point you in the right direction. And so, there are a couple of things I think you should definitely do to increase diversity in your candidate pool. One is, if you have a careers page on your website, take a look at that careers page and say, what does somebody think and feel when they look at this careers page? Do they see people like me? Does this environment look welcoming to somebody like me? And I realize we all have to start from somewhere. And so if you have a very homogenous team right now, and you're not wanting to send the wrong message, then be explicit. Add a statement on your careers page that says, we encourage people from all different backgrounds, racial, ethnic, cultural, gender. We encourage age groups. We encourage candidates from all backgrounds to apply for our jobs, and we commit to running candidates through an equitable process and hiring those who are the best fit for this opportunity. So being explicit about welcoming it is a starting point. When you're asking for referrals from your own network, you have to be careful that, people asking their friends for referrals might possibly just generate more people that are just like you. So be explicit when you're asking service providers and employees for referrals for open positions. Tell them diversity is something that's really important to me. So see if you can recommend folks from different backgrounds, different groups, so that we can have a really strong pool of candidates. And then also, let's see, make sure you reevaluate the way you've been hiring and ask yourself some of the tough questions if bias may be shortchanging candidates from moving forward. And then, going back to the analogy I touched on it at the beginning of the presentation about fishing in different ponds, take a look at where you've been posting jobs, where you're getting your candidates, and ask yourself where else you could be posting. So I mentioned, for example, if a financial services firm is always posting on the top 10 business school job boards, they can be looking at other schools. They can go to the historically Black colleges and universities. They can post on association job boards like the Texas Wall Street Women. And those are just like two right off the top of my head that are going to generate a broader pool of diversity. But if you do a Google search, I'm working with a tech company. They're posting on women in tech and Blacks in tech. Both of these are generating more diversity in their slate of candidates. So there are a lot of options out there on getting the word out and posting on different job boards.
All right, we had a couple questions come into the chat. So first off, what is your favorite question to ask in an interview?
Oh my goodness, that's easy for me because I definitely have a favorite. So I love this question so much that I ask it multiple times. My favorite question is, what interests you most about this opportunity? When I post the job, it is the first application question I ask. So the candidates fill it out the very first time they apply for the job. And it's usually very, very brief at that stage. The moment I do a phone interview with them, it's the first question I ask them on the phone interview. Now I want to hear them in real time, just talk it out. And then if I do the recorded video interview where I send them a link, I use a tool called SparkHire that I absolutely love that makes it very easy to populate interview questions, and candidates can record their responses on a mobile phone or laptop on their own time. The very first question I always use is, again, what interests you most? And I'm asking it in multiple formats, different times, to see if there's a common thread across their answers. I'm looking for authenticity. I'm looking for enthusiasm. I'm looking for the fact that they did their homework. There's something really special, really unique about this opportunity. There's a reason they really want this job. It's not just a job they're applying for. And so I do think that enthusiasm level directly correlates to the probability of success ultimately. And so if it's obvious that it's just a job and they didn't do their homework and they're not putting that much effort in, I'm going to keep moving because we need somebody for a peak performance environment who's really excited about this opportunity.
I love that question. That's great. And then I'm going to come back to another question that we have, but first somebody said, do you have a specific hiring platform that you use for stage 2, the video? So is SparkHire the one you use for the whole process?
So I use SparkHire during stage 2, and it's the only time I use SparkHire, and I don't use it to run my whole process. I just use it for the recorded videos because it's so easy to set up and it's so easy for the candidates to use it. It just tees up each question. And I mentioned earlier, I'm not a fan of game show hiring at all. And so I adjust the settings so they can think about it before they start recording. And if they don't like the way it comes out, they can re-record it. I only get what they submit. And of course, Spark Hire offers the option, the timer can start as soon as they see it and they only get one shot, but I don't want that. I don't want game show. I want to know who they really are. And I try to make sure it's not a stressful experience for the candidate. But Spark Hire is such an amazing platform. It gives hiring managers, just 4 or 5 minutes, whatever you choose to do with it, where you can hear from the candidate in their own words. But I will tell you that when I use it, I also coach my hiring managers on unconscious bias, because it is so easy to slip into making a quick decision once you see this short video. And so I remind them that the video is just a data point. It should be affirmative that this candidate should move forward, but it is just a data point. And some types of positions, you have to expect that the candidates aren't going to do as well as others. A marketing role, a communications role, they're going to do phenomenal on this step. But a software developer may not do as well, being on camera. And so you want to make sure that you're not judging them for how they perform on camera. You're really just paying attention to who they are. And again, do they fit with your needs for the job?
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay, let's see. Next question is, do you have any recommendations on how to choose skill assessments? My understanding is that companies have to be careful in administering these to prevent practicing unfair hiring practices.
Yeah, so I have one that is definitely a favorite of mine, that is validated for hiring, and it's really appropriate for more senior level roles. Doesn't have to be executive level, but it's a little bit pricey, so it's probably not something you would want to do on every position. And when you do it, you would want to do it farther along in the process. And in the grand scheme of assessments that are available, frankly, it runs about $500. So it's an investment, but there are more expensive, more involved assessments out there for executive level roles. I'm usually operating in the mid to senior level space. This particular assessment is called the Harrison, and I absolutely love it. I also, this is administered by the consultancy who I mentioned earlier, who trained me on behavioral interviewing, AUM Partners out of Chicago. They administer the Harrison. It is a work preferences assessment. So it starts with a template that is unique to the job, that is based on the traits that you would typically need to be successful in that role. And then it evaluates your preference for those traits. So similarly to Gallup's Strength Finder, the theory is that we thrive in our work and we perform at our best when we're spending the majority of our time doing work that we enjoy. And you may not love every single thing that you do, but if the majority of your time is spent doing work that you enjoy, you'll be successful in the role. And that's what the Harrison is screening for, is your preference for those traits that are required to be successful in that job. So that's one of my favorites. But frankly, the real answer to your question would be, what industry is it? What level position is it? There would be a number of questions I'd want to ask to learn a little bit more before I actually made a recommendation on which assessment to use. I'm also a huge fan of Predictive Index. And John Burt, who is another volunteer and mentor for Tech Fort Worth, he is able to administer Predictive Index. And I find that one to be incredibly effective also. So there's another little resource for you. Look up John Burt and talk to him about Predictive Index.
Awesome. And I'll drop his LinkedIn below. I think he had to hop off or something, but he was on for a little bit. He's normally on these.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I'll drop his information. Perfect. Okay, so next question is, how do you address restrictions of how do you address restrictions some organizations have on giving references? For example, many companies I've worked for have a policy that we can only verify dates of employment and nothing else.
Yeah, so that's a real issue, and often it's the larger organizations that have a policy, and I believe it's for liability reasons. But a candidate can always provide other references. You may come up against a wall with being able to get the reference that you want, but usually I ask a candidate to provide the references. I don't just call the names that they automatically give me. I will usually tell a candidate I'd like to speak to, the most recent supervisor that's available. And so if your past job cannot provide it, maybe the job before can. I'd like to speak to another member of leadership who maybe you didn't report directly to, but who could also speak to your performance. Maybe another peer manager who you interacted with, and maybe someone who reported to you. If a candidate is not able to provide references, especially if they're, 5+ years into their career, I would consider it a red flag. The immediate supervisor or the HR department of their last employer may have a policy against providing them, but that individual should certainly be able to, whether, maybe it was someone they worked with during an internship, or, there are different types of references, and the candidate should be able to produce another high quality reference, even if the former employer can't do it.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. We have a couple minutes left, so feel free to keep putting your questions in the chat. But I have some more ready to go. Ooh. Okay. So one of the questions I have is, with the structured interview process, are you ever worried that that would take too long? Are you worried that you would lose good people if they have to go through all those steps?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I will tell you that I don't worry about losing good people, because again, thinking about peak performance, I think peak performance corporate athletes, they want an involved process. They're interviewing their employer as much as you're interviewing them. They want to make sure it's a good fit, and they love to compete. So again, thinking about that elite category of peak performance, the involved process is actually conducive to getting them to the finish line. That said, great talent often is being recruited into other opportunities, and sometimes timing can be everything. And so I try to communicate what the process will involve on the front end, check for acceptance. Does that work for you? I ask directly, are you in any other processes? Will you keep me informed? And all along the way, when they're moving forward, how's this going for you? Has anything changed in your status? I definitely keep tabs on it. But I think what adds the most value for the candidate is knowing up front what to expect. I think candidates get really frustrated when they feel like they're jumping through hoops and it's one thing after another and they're not hearing back. But when they know what to expect and they know where they stand, they generally stay very engaged. I will tell you, my entire process that I'm running, when I look at the positions I filled over the last year in 2020, about 15 different positions in different industries. My average time to fill was just under 2.5 months start to finish, from scoping the role, getting clear on what success looks like, all the way through sourcing candidates, evaluating the candidate pool, screening, interviewing, and getting the candidate to the finish line. The average time to fill was just under 2.5 months. So if you need butts and seats yesterday, that might be too long. But the positions I work on, you're not going to do it in less than 2 months without really cutting corners. And frankly, I think 2 to 2.5 months is phenomenal time to produce a great high quality outcome. I usually set expectations with my clients more around 90 days, and the more senior, more complex roles, potentially even 90 to 120 days.
Awesome. And then I have one more question. And then I'll turn it over to anybody else if they'll have questions. But how can you screen for things like attention to detail and work ethic in your process?
Great question. These fall in the category that I consider sort of threshold competencies. Pretty much any professional role in a peak performance environment is going to need a few of these common traits, great communication skills, written and verbal, attention to detail, the ability to stay organized, that strong work ethic. So this goes back to underscoring why a dynamic, multi-stage structured interview process is so incredibly effective, because you get to see how the candidate conducts themselves over a series of interactions over a period of time through different formats. And I assure you, the high achievers set themselves apart. It becomes like night and day, those that put the extra effort in. So you see that work ethic, you see that commitment. One of the things I like to do with the video or a writing sample or a work sample is instead of telling them, I'd like you to complete this by Friday, I say, I'll send you the instructions. Please let me know what turnaround time works for you. And then I'm looking for how precise they are with their turnaround time. Do they get back to me? Do they commit? Do they say, I'll get this to you by end of the day Friday? Or do they say, I'll get it to you sometime next week, which is actually a huge pet peeve of mine. And then once the deadline is set, the due date is set, do they follow up? Do they do it on time? Do they overachieve it? And so over the series of interactions across multiple interviews, work ethic shows up, attention to details shows up in the video, in the writing sample, in the conversations. And then you get to see the communication skills across all these different formats, listening on the phone, recorded video, live video, in person, written, all of these different formats. Frankly, the structured interview process gives you an enormous amount of data in a rather efficient and organized fashion.
Awesome. Well, Hope, thank you for answering all of my questions. We got through all of the questions in the chat. And I know some people were hopping off, but they all said thank you. A couple of them were directly to me. A couple of them were out to everybody. So I just want to say thank you for all of them. Again, thank you so much for being here today. While we're tying up, we just have 1 or 2 more minutes. So do you want to give one more overview of Trinity Park Talent and what stage y'all work with? Sorry, my Chicago accent just came out. Wow. Trinity Park Talent. And then, yeah, and then if you have any closing notes, and then I'll take over from there and give a preview for the next event.
Sure. Thank you so much. I welcome connections on LinkedIn. I love to connect with people on LinkedIn. I post content about hiring there, and I love to engage with people there. You'll see jobs that I'm posting there. Trinity Park Talent runs a hiring process. I'm a talent advisor, not a recruiter. I run a hiring process that is industry agnostic, targeting mid to senior level roles. And I only work with companies who are really prioritizing people and culture, because you have to really care about people to want to run a process that is this thorough. And I really take a lot of pride in representing my clients as their employer brand. And I can only talk about something I'm really excited about. So it has to be a great opportunity to be able to attract top talent. And there's more on my website, and would love to connect with folks on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, Hope, again, thank you so much for being here today and carving out this time for our community. We love having you here. I look forward to having you back soon.